My name is Noah, and my story begins in a world that had lost its way. Before I tell you my exciting story and how I survived the flood, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Humanity, created to reflect God's goodness and love, had become completely corrupted. Everywhere he looked, he saw evil, violence, and hardened hearts. Men lived as if there were no consequences, ignoring the Creator who had given them life. The land, which was once a paradise, was now covered in darkness and sin. It was in this chaos when I heard his voice. The voice of God, clear and powerful, penetrated my soul. He told me that he had observed the wickedness reigning in the hearts of men, and that the pain of seeing his creation so distorted was great. "I regret having created man," he said, and those words were etched in my heart. However, in the midst of this devastation, God saw me, not because I was perfect, but because I sought to walk with him. He was an ordinary man, but my faith and obedience were my greatest treasures. It was then that God revealed his plan to me. A judgment would come upon the earth, a universal flood, a necessary act to purify what humanity had destroyed. Everything that breathed would be wiped from the face of the earth. Upon hearing these words, my heart was filled with fear, but also with hope, because God offered me a way out. He asked me to build an ark, a refuge, to save me, my family, and a remnant of all living creatures. It was an immense task, a divine mission, but I did not hesitate. His voice was clear, and his trust in me was an honor I could not ignore. This calling, as heavy as it seemed, was also an act of grace. Despite the corruption of the world, God was giving me the opportunity to be part of something greater, to preserve life and, with it, a new beginning for humanity. I knew that my obedience would be tested, but I also knew that the same God who called me would be my strength. Thus began my journey, a journey that would change not only my life but the destiny of the entire world. And as I prepared for what was to come, I still didn't know how much I would have to trust him, nor the challenges we would face when the waters covered the earth. After receiving God's call, the only thing I could do was obey. His words resonated clearly in my mind. "Make yourself an ark of cypress wood." It was not a simple command. It was a monumental project, extremely detailed, designed by the Creator himself. He instructed me that the ark was to measure 138 meters in length, 23 meters in width, and 14 meters in height. It was bigger than I had ever imagined building. It had to include compartments, windows, and a door on the side, and it had to be covered with tar inside and out to withstand the waters that would come. As I listened, I realized that he was not just giving me instructions on how to build a boat. He was giving me a plan of salvation. The ark would be the refuge that preserved life in a world on the brink of destruction. Every measure, every detail, was an expression of his care and divine purpose. It wasn't easy. When I shared with my family what God had told me, I felt their looks filled with astonishment, perhaps even doubt. But my faith did not waver. I began to gather the wood and the necessary tools. Day after day, I worked on the ark under the scorching sun and the mockery of those around me. "Noah, you're crazy," they shouted. "What is that giant thing you are building?" Some laughed. Others pointed at me like a fool, but I didn't pay attention to them. God had spoken, and that was enough. In addition to the ark, God ordered me to gather animals, 2 of each species, male and female. However, for the clean animals, he asked me to take 7 pairs of each. These creatures would also be preserved to repopulate the earth. I can't explain how they came to me, but they did. As if they understood that something greater was at play, the animals began to appear, one by one. Lions, birds, reptiles, deer, all of them walked towards the ark with a calmness that could only be the work of God. The work seemed endless, but with each hammer strike and each plank he placed, he felt her presence. I was not alone. My family helped me, and together we prepared provisions, grains, fruits, and everything that would be necessary to survive while we were inside the ark. Months, perhaps years, passed as they worked on that gigantic structure. It was more than a construction. It was an act of faith, a declaration of trust in the words of God. Even though I didn't fully understand what was to come, I knew that He would fulfill what He had said. Finally, when the ark was ready, I stopped to observe it. It was imposing, a symbol of hope in the midst of a doomed world. God had spoken, I had obeyed, and now everything was prepared for the inevitable. The clouds were beginning to darken, and a strange sensation filled the air. I knew the moment was near, the moment when everything would change. And so, with the ark completed, the animals gathered, and the provisions stored, I prepared to await God's next instruction, aware that the judgment He had promised was about to come. Everything was ready. The enormous ark stood imposing, a refuge in the midst of a world that would soon face the judgment of God. One day, the Lord spoke to me again. "Enter the ark, you and your whole household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation." I obeyed without hesitation. Together with my wife, my 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, we prepared to enter. It was a solemn moment, filled with silence and anticipation. The animals, just as God had promised, arrived one after another. From the most imposing beasts to the smallest creatures, all obeyed in invisible order, as if they understood that this was their refuge. Male and female of each species boarded the ark, along with the 7 pairs of clean animals. The sounds of paws, roars, and birdsong filled the air, but everything was peaceful, as if the Creator Himself were guiding them. Then, the Lord Himself closed the door of the ark. That moment deeply impacted me. It was a definitive act, a reminder that what was to come was completely under God's control. Inside the ark, I felt a mix of emotions: gratitude for His protection, but also a deep sorrow for what would happen outside those wooden walls. And so, the first drops of rain began to fall. At first, it seemed ordinary, like any storm, but soon the drops turned into torrents. The sky opened up, and the waters began to descend with an unprecedented force. Simultaneously, the depths of the earth broke apart, and the underground waters burst forth with fury. Within hours, the rivers and seas overflowed, and the land began to disappear beneath the rising waters. Inside the ark, we clung to our faith. We could hear the roar of the water pounding against the walls of the ark, the distant cries of those who had not believed. It was a heartbreaking sound, but we knew there was nothing more we could do. We had warned the world, but they had chosen to ignore the message. The flood continued for 40 days and 40 nights. The rain did not cease, and the waters rose to cover the highest mountains. Everything that ever walked, breathed, or flew outside the ark perished. It was impossible not to think about the magnitude of what was happening. We were witnessing an act of divine justice and, at the same time, an act of grace. The ark floated on the waters, carrying us safely amidst the devastation. It was a refuge in the chaos, a reminder that God keeps His promises. Inside, we took care of the animals and prayed. There was uncertainty about what we would find in the end, but we trusted that the same God who had saved us up to that moment would guide us towards a new beginning. Weeks went by, and although the waters seemed never-ending, we knew we were in God's hands. Outside, everything had changed. The land we knew had disappeared beneath an immense ocean. But inside the ark, life continued, preserved by the power and mercy of our Creator. The judgment had begun, but so had the promise of a new dawn. Days, weeks, and months passed while the ark floated on the endless waters. 40 days of intense rain had passed, but even when the rain ceased, the world remained submerged in a vast ocean that covered even the highest mountains. It was a time of waiting, a test of faith and patience like no other. For 150 days, the ark continued to sail, carried by the currents, with no apparent course, but guided by the invisible hand of God. Inside, my family and I dedicated ourselves to taking care of the animals, feeding them and ensuring they were safe. It was hard work, but it also helped us keep hope alive. We knew that, although the world we once knew had disappeared, God had not abandoned us. I remember how we prayed together every day. We clung to the promise that this was not the end, but a new beginning. But there were moments when the silence from outside weighed heavily on us. The constant swaying of the ark and the uncertainty of when this weight would end tested us. How much longer would the world remain submerged under the waters? So, on the 150th day, something changed. God remembered me. It's not that he had forgotten us, but now was the time to act. God sent a powerful wind over the earth, and the waters began to recede slowly. We could feel the change in the air, as if judgment was giving way to restoration. Over time, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. We couldn't see much, but we knew there was solid ground beneath us. Even so, the waters had not completely receded, and we kept waiting. It was a slow process. Day after day, we watched the waters recede, but it was still not time to leave. To find out if it was safe, I decided to send a raven. I watched it fly in circles, but it didn't find a place to perch and returned. Then I sent a dove, but it also returned without success. Time kept passing, and our patience was tested once again. Finally, after several days, I sent the dove out again, and this time it returned with an olive leaf in its beak. That little leaf meant everything to us. It was a sign that life was beginning to return, that the land was being restored. The day the dove returned with an olive leaf in its beak, something changed within me. It was as if that little leaf symbolized everything we had been waiting for. It was a sign of life, a promise that the world was being reborn. My family and I looked at that leaf with wonder and gratitude. After months surrounded by water, there was finally hope for dry land. We knew that the restoration was underway, but we also understood that it was not yet time to leave the ark. God had been clear in his guidance from the beginning, and we would do nothing without his word. So, with renewed patience, we continued waiting. 7 days later, I decided to send the pigeon again. This time, it didn't come back. The meaning was clear. She had found a place to stay, a home. The land, which had been submerged and devastated, could now sustain life once again. My heart was filled with emotion, but also with humility. Everything we had experienced was part of God's perfect plan, and soon he would guide us to the next step. Finally, the day arrived. The voice of God spoke clearly, as powerful as ever. Come out of the ark with your sons, your wife, and your daughters-in-law. Also bring out all the living creatures that are with you. The birds, the livestock, and all the animals that crawl on the ground. Let them be fruitful. May they multiply and fill the earth. With reverence, we opened the door of the ark and took the first step outside. The view was breathtaking. The world, although empty and silent, seemed clean, new, like a blank page ready to be written on again. I felt the fresh air on my face, and a profound peace washed over me. We had survived. God had been faithful, and now we were facing a new beginning. The animals also began to come out, each following its instinct. Lions, deer, birds, and reptiles scattered in all directions. It was as if creation was ready to begin anew, to flourish and fill the earth once more. My family and I watched everything in awe. knowing that we were part of something greater than we could comprehend. As I watched the sun shining over the renewed land, I felt a deep gratitude. We had spent months in the ark, protected by the hand of God. We had seen the judgment, but we were also witnessing His grace and mercy. Everything that had happened was not only a testament to His power, but also to His love. At that moment, I knew that the next step would be crucial. This new world needed to be dedicated to God, and soon we would do something that would mark our commitment to Him. There was much ahead, but now, as we set foot on solid ground, we were ready to start anew, under the guidance and blessing of the Creator. Upon leaving the ark, my first action was not to explore the new world, nor to think about how to rebuild our lives. There was something more important to do, thank God. He had sustained, guided, and protected us during the greatest trial humanity had ever seen. Now, we were alive, treading on renewed land, and my heart was full of gratitude. I gathered stones and built an altar in the name of the Lord. On it, I offered sacrifices of the clean animals we had brought to the ark, according to God's instructions. The smoke of the sacrifice ascended to the heavens, and its aroma was pleasing to the Lord. It was not simply a ritual. It was an expression of worship and recognition that all we had and were belonged to Him. It was at that moment that God spoke again, but this time not to give instructions. He spoke to establish something eternal, a covenant. I will never again curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood. Nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. His words filled me with peace. The judgment had been necessary, but now God promised mercy and a future hope. Then, something wonderful happened. God pointed to the sky, and there, above the clouds, the first rainbow appeared. The colors shone with indescribable beauty, and as we watched it, God said, "I have placed my rainbow in the clouds, which will serve as a sign of my covenant with the earth. When I cover the earth with clouds, and the rainbow appears in them, I will remember the covenant I have established with you and with all living beings." The rainbow would be an eternal reminder of His promise, not just for my family, but for all of humanity that would come after us. Every time the rains came, the bow in the sky would remind us that God would never again send a flood to destroy the earth. His judgment had been replaced by a covenant of grace and hope. In that moment, as I looked at the rainbow, I felt a mix of awe and humility. God had not only preserved our lives, He was giving us a second chance, a new opportunity to live in obedience to Him and fill the earth with His glory. With that pact established, I knew our purpose was clear. My family and I would be the new beginnings of humanity. With our lives, we would seek to honor the God who had not only brought judgment, but also shown mercy. And every time the rainbow appeared in the sky, we would remember that His faithfulness and love endure forever. After the flood, life began to renew itself. The land, now stripped of all the corruption that had once invaded it, began to heal. My family and I began to rebuild our lives, filled with hope and gratitude for the opportunity to start anew. God had restored the land and had given us the responsibility to fill it again, to multiply, and to be its stewards. The first few days were full of reflection, especially for me. We had witnessed the devastation of judgment, but also the incredible mercy of God. It was a daily reminder of our fragility and, at the same time, of His infinite goodness. My family and I began to cultivate the land, and the first crop sprouted. Everything seemed to be in its place, and we began to build a new life, although always under the shadow of what we had lived through. However, it didn't take long before difficulties arose within our own family. One day, while we were working, an incident happened with Cam, my youngest son. He saw something he shouldn't have seen. I found myself in a vulnerable state, in the middle of a harvest that had led me to drink a little more wine than I should have. Ham, instead of showing respect, mocked my condition and told his brothers. Shem and Japheth, upon hearing the mockery, decided to cover me without making any comments, with respect and dignity. Ham's act was a reflection of the attitude that, unfortunately, would extend to his descendants. When I woke up, I realized what had happened, and I felt deeply saddened. I called Cam and spoke to him with pain, warning him about respecting others and the importance of living with honor and righteousness. But he also pronounced a curse on him, saying that he would be a servant to his brothers. He did not know then that this attitude would create a complicated legacy for his descendants, who would be known as the Canaanites, a people who, over time, would turn away from God. Despite this difficult situation, life went on. The sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth multiplied, and the land began to be inhabited once again. God gave us the command to spread throughout the world, and nations began to arise from our families. Over time, I saw how humanity spread across the world. Through my descendants, nations were established, and although God's promise remained alive, so did human frailty. At the end of my days, when I was 950 years old, I felt that my time on this earth had come to an end. I had lived a full life, full of trials, but also of victories. God had used me for a transcendent purpose, not only to save my family, but to preserve humanity. My legacy would not only be remembered for the construction of the ark and the survival of the flood, but also for the eternal covenant that God had established with all of us. Before I die, I trust in the Lord, knowing that the future of humanity, although uncertain in many ways, will always be under His control. My life had been a witness to God's justice, but also to His mercy. And so, as my soul surrendered to the Creator, I knew that the story of humanity would continue, and that the covenant of the rainbow would remain a visible promise of God's faithfulness to His creation. My family moved forward, and generations were born, some faithful, others estranged from the faith, but always with the possibility of returning to the God who had preserved our lives. The legacy of Noah, the man who built the ark and witnessed the flood, would be remembered as that of a man who obeyed God and was part of the beginning of a new humanity. Thank you for listening attentively to my story. I want to invite you again, if you haven't already, to subscribe to this fantastic channel so that together we can learn from these majestic stories narrated epically. God bless you.